Welcome, deeply curious listeners, to another journey with the Deep Dive. We're here to slice through those complex ideas, get straight to the insights that really matter. And today, we are embarking on a truly profound intellectual adventure. We're taking a deep dive into Yuval Noah Harari's really groundbreaking work, Nexus. Now, this isn't just about understanding the latest gadgets or, algorithms. It's much bigger. It's about grasping how information itself has shaped human history, defined who we are, and crucially, what it all means for our future, especially, of course, with the meteoric rise of AI. You might be tuning in because, you're grappling with the dizzying pace of AI innovation. Or maybe you're just trying to make sense of that overwhelming flood of data in your daily life. It's a lot. So our mission today is to cut through all that noise, give you a shortcut to being truly well-informed, maybe spark some of those aha moments that stick with you, all without the usual information overload. So with that big picture in mind, let's unpack this.
It's a fantastic starting point. Harari's Nexus, it really does offer this sweeping, almost breathtaking historical view, how information networks have evolved, right from the dawn of humanity, the Stone Age, moving through ancient empires, modern nation states, and leading us right up to now, to the cusp of this, AI-dominated future, potentially. It's a journey that consistently challenges our most basic assumptions about knowledge, truth, power, what they really are.
What grabs you right away, I think, is that Harari doesn't start with some big cheer for human progress. He starts with a really unsettling question, doesn't he?
He does. It's quite profound.
He asks basically, if we sapiens are so wise, if we've managed to collect these incredible amounts of information, everything from DNA's double helix to galaxies light years away, then why? Why, with all this knowledge, are we so, self-destructive? Why haven't all these terabytes of data, this supposed wisdom, given us clear answers, universally accepted answers to the really big questions, like who are we? Or what's a good life, really?
It's a genuine paradox he puts front and center. We have this immense capacity for information, right? Yet, as he points out, we're still incredibly susceptible to what he calls, quite starkly, mass insanity. And he doesn't shy away from recent history either. Think about Nazism or Stalinism. These weren't ancient primitive societies. No, these were modern industrialized nations. They had access to unprecedented amounts of information, sophisticated networks, and yet they were utterly engulfed by delusion, systematic brutality on a scale that's just staggering. It forces you to confront this really uncomfortable idea. More information doesn't automatically lead to better self-understanding or wisdom or, frankly, a more humane world.
Right. So if that's the reality check, what's the sort of conventional thinking Harari is pushing back against? What's the default assumption?
He calls it the naive view of information. This is the idea, and it's pretty common, I think, that gathering, processing, sharing information, it inherently leads to truth, almost automatically. And the thinking goes, truth gives you power, and eventually that leads to wisdom. So from this perspective, if you see a network spreading delusions or lies, that's just a temporary glitch, an aberration. The underlying belief is that, in the long run, clear-sighted, honest use of information, it'll always win out over falsehoods. It has to, right?
And to be fair, we have seen that naive view work spectacularly well in some areas. It's not completely wrong, is it?
Not at all. And medicine is probably the clearest, most powerful example. Absolutely undeniable. Think about it. By relentlessly gathering information on diseases, pathogens, human anatomy, how treatments work, blood types, everything. And crucially, by sharing that data across huge networks of doctors, researchers, hospitals, we've achieved something monumental. Harari brings up the jump in child survival rates. It's stunning. He mentions how late 18th century, even in a well-off family like Goethe's in Germany, the child survival rate was maybe 25%. Only 3 out of 12 kids might make it to adulthood. Grim. And now, fast forward to 2020. Globally, it's over 95%. In Germany, it's like 99.5%. This massive leap in human well-being, it's a direct result of collecting, analyzing, and sharing accurate medical information. So in that specific vital area, the naive view has definitely triumphed.
It really is incredible. A powerful case for information leading to progress. But then, just as you start feeling comfortable, Harari does what Harari does. He pulls the rug out. He introduces this really revolutionary idea. Information, he says, has no essential link to truth. This is where it gets properly interesting, almost like reality bending.
Exactly.
He's saying information isn't just about representing reality as it is, like a mirror. Instead, he argues, it actively creates new realities. It does this by connecting things, by putting them, as he puts it, information. And here's the kicker, the really surprising bit. Errors, lies, fantasies, even fictions, they are also information.
Precisely. And this redefinition is so important to grasp. He uses astrology as an example. It's brilliant. He says basically any theory of information that can't explain why astrology has been so significant throughout history, it's just inadequate. Think about it. A horoscope doesn't just describe your love life.
Yeah.
By linking stars and relationships, it actually puts lovers into new astrological formations, influencing how they see things, how they act.
No.
And propaganda. It's not just conveying facts or supposed facts. It's putting voters into political formations, reshaping their worldview, marching songs, too. Even if the lyrics aren't literally true about the enemy, they put soldiers into military formations. They bind them, motivate them. So information, in this wider sense, it's not just about informing us about reality. It's about putting things in formation. It's about connection, organization, creation, not just passive description.
That's a really powerful way to think about it. Changes how you look at everything, from advertising to, well, national myths. And this broader view of information, it leads straight into one of humanity's biggest puzzles, right? How did we, Homo sapiens, manage to build these huge societies, especially given our limitations? Harari suggests we can only really maintain close long-term bonds with, what, maybe a few hundred people max?
Yeah, the Dunbar number idea, around 150, is often cited.
Right, which is way less than, say, chimpanzee troops of maybe 60, or Neanderthal bands probably only a few dozen. So how do we scale up, from small bands to massive empires, global networks?
And this is where stories come in. He argues they were humanity's first crucial information technology. Stories, Harari says, created what he calls intersubjective entities. This is a completely new level of reality, one that fundamentally transformed the human experience.
Okay, intersubjective entities. Break that down a bit.
Right. So think about reality in layers. First, there's objective reality. Things that exist whether we know about them or believe in them or not. Stones, asteroids, gravity, they're just there.
Got it. Physical stuff.
Then there's subjective reality, things that exist only in your own individual consciousness. Your personal feeling of pain or pleasure or maybe a dream you had last night, it's unique to you.
Okay, internal experience.
But then, Harari argues, stories brought about this third level, intersubjective reality. These are things that exist only because we collectively believe in them. We agree to act as if they're real. They aren't physically out there like a rock. And they aren't just in one person's head, like a feeling.
So things like
money. A piece of paper or a number on a screen has no real value in itself. But because we all agree it does, it becomes incredibly powerful, drives economies, or gods. They don't exist objectively, you can't point to them. But shared belief creates huge religious communities that shape history, or nations. Borders on a map are just lines. But our collective belief in France or Japan creates powerful political realities. These are shared fictions, in a way, consensual beliefs. But their power is immense because they bind us together in ways objective or subjective reality can't.
wow. So applying that, the Jewish Passover story isn't just a nice tale.
No, it's an incredibly effective information technology. It takes biological kinship, which has natural limits, and stretches it massively, connects millions who've never met, makes them feel like part of one extended family through that shared narrative.
And the story of Jesus. Harari's take is interesting there, too.
Yeah, he stresses it wasn't likely some deliberate lie cooked up by St. Paul, to manipulate people. It was more likely born from deep emotional projections, shared hopes, this collective wishful thinking. And over centuries, it gained millions of true believers who genuinely felt its power. And that, undeniably, changed history.
So these stories, these shared beliefs, were the key.
They were a total game changer, according to Harari. Neanderthals lived in small, probably quite isolated groups, limited cooperation. But Stone Age sapiens, once they developed storytelling, they could be linked by shared myths about ancestors, spirits, sacred places. These links weren't based on knowing everyone personally, but on believing the same stories. So small bands could feel part of a larger tribe, hundreds, maybe thousands strong. They could cooperate flexibly on a scale never seen before.
And that gave sapiens the edge over other human species, too.
A massive, insurmountable edge. Harari argues stories literally made us the most powerful animal on Earth, allowed cooperation on a scale that was just unimaginable before.
It's such a fundamental idea. Yet, as you mentioned, this power of stories, it's often missed, isn't it, or actively denied, especially by, say, purely materialist views of history. like Marxism.
Exactly. Marxists, as Harari points out, tend to see stories, religions, ideologies, national myths as just a kind of smokescreen, a fancy cover for the real drivers, underlying power struggles, economic interests.
Right, so the Crusades weren't really about God. They were about land and trade routes. World War I wasn't about patriotism. It was about empires fighting over resources.
Yeah.
The Iraq War, not WMDs, but oil, God, flag, whatever, just camouflage for greed.
And Harari's counter is crucial here. He's not denying material interests exist. Of course they do. But to dismiss stories as just camouflage, that completely misunderstands their actual power. The power of stories lies precisely in their ability to define reality for people, to create these shared intersubjective truths. And that's what mobilizes millions, turns individuals into powerful, coordinated forces.
Can you give an example of how he contrasts that?
Yeah, his comparison of the U.S. Constitution and the Ten Commandments is really insightful. The Constitution starts, "We the people." It openly admits it's a human creation, and because it admits its human origin, it can be amended, it can adapt, change over time. We can argue about it, improve it.
Okay.
The Ten Commandments, though, it starts, "I am the Lord your God," claims divine origin. And because it claims divine authority, it basically precludes human changes, which is why, as Harari points out, it still technically endorses slavery today. There's no built-in mechanism to say, okay, that bit was wrong, let's update it.
So admitting human origin allows change, but makes agreement harder, while claiming divine origin enforces agreement, but prevents change.
Exactly. And that tension, that trade-off, sets up what Harari calls the perennial dilemma. Every human information network, tribe, empire, nation, online community has to juggle two tasks: discovering truth and creating order. Information isn't just raw material for finding out what's true, and it's not just a weapon for control. It's somehow profoundly both, always in this complex, often messy dance.
That perennial dilemma, truth versus order, it seems like it would become even more obvious, maybe more problematic, when we shift from oral stories to the next big thing, writing, documents.
Absolutely. Stories are amazing for myths, national identity, inspiration. Think of Zionism, inspired by poets like Herzl, powerful stuff. But try running a complex administration on poetry. Try collecting taxes across an empire with just a compelling myth. It just doesn't scale. It doesn't work for the details.
Right. You need records.
Exactly. Tax records. They are the complete opposite of a gripping story, aren't they? Dry lists of amounts owed, amounts paid, no narrative flair. Poets can ignore them. Tax collectors, they live by them. They're the nuts and bolts of large-scale organization. And the key insight, again, is that these documents don't just record reality, they actively create it. Think about a constitution, or a peace treaty, or just a commercial contract, or a marriage certificate. Every single word in those documents carries immense weight because they literally define new intersubjective realities. They turn abstract ideas into legally binding facts with tangible consequences. They shape behavior.
Okay, so that leads us straight into bureaucracy, which Harari sees as the solution to the retrieval problem for big organizations.
Yeah, the retrieval problem, he uses this great little anecdote. A priestess in ancient Mesopotamia, Noramtani, back in 1730 BCE. She desperately needed specific clay tablets from a temple archive to prove her inheritance claim in court. It's over 3,700 years ago, but it shows perfectly. Even then, being able to store, categorize, and reliably find information was absolutely critical for order, for justice, for making society function.
So bureaucracy is the system for doing that retrieval at scale.
Right. It becomes indispensable for managing these complex information flows. But, and it's a big but Harari warns that bureaucracy, much like mythology, often tends to sacrifice truth for order. It does this by inventing and imposing its own categories, its own order, onto a messy reality, and that can distort things, sometimes really badly.
Can you give an example of that distortion?
Well, take biological species classification. Evolution is messy, it's a spectrum, life doesn't fit neatly into boxes. But biologists impose the category of species, like Homo sapiens versus Homo neanderthalensis. Yet we know they interbred. Most of us carry some Neanderthal DNA. So were they really separate species?
No.
Or just different populations? The category species itself is an intersubjective reality, a useful label created by scientists for order, yes, but not necessarily an objective discovery of a pre-existing absolute dividing line in nature.
And sometimes these imposed categories, these bureaucratic fictions, have terrible human costs.
Devastating costs. Harari uses the chilling example of the kulak in Soviet Russia. That wasn't an objective description of certain peasants. It was a label, a political bureaucratic fiction invented by human mythmakers, Lenin, Stalin, party ideologues. And then it was ruthlessly imposed by the bureaucrats. This label created a new intersubjective Soviet truth that justified the enslavement and starvation of millions. People who were just farmers.
It's terrifying. He mentions his own grandfather, too, right? Bruno?
Yes, a very personal, poignant example. His grandfather lost his Romanian citizenship. Why? Because he found the bureaucratic demands to prove he wasn't an alien ridiculous. He was born in Trimipsy, lived there his whole life, paid taxes. But the system, with its rigid boxes and rules, couldn't easily categorize him. He didn't fit neatly. And so, poof, his citizenship, his fundamental rights were gone.
Just like that.
Yeah.
Because he didn't fit the paperwork.
Exactly. It shows how bureaucratic logic, chasing order and neatness, can just trample individual truth and dignity. Now, Harari does acknowledge, to be fair, that bureaucracy, despite these flaws, is often necessary. You probably can't run a modern healthcare system or national education or security without it. It would likely be chaos. It provides a necessary level of order, even if it sacrifices some truths along the way. But it does make you wonder, is this the only way? Could we manage huge networks differently?
Like his slightly absurd suggestion of doctors studying history.
Yeah, or abolishing rigid academic divisions. It seems wild, but it highlights the potential downsides of these very rigid, imposed orders we've built, how ingrained they are.
And this whole shift from oral stories to written documents and these growing bureaucracies, it also caused a major power shift, didn't it?
Yeah. A fundamental shift. Literate bureaucracies massively strengthened central authorities, kings, emperors, early states. Why? Because it became so much easier for them to systematically tax people across vast territories, to judge them by uniform laws, to conscript them into armies. The paperwork made control much more efficient.
And harder for ordinary people to deal with.
Much harder. The system became more complex, more opaque, harder for the average person to understand, let alone influence or evade. So even when the bureaucracy was doing good things, building roads or canals, it still widened the gap between the rulers and the ruled. The center gathered way more information about the population, while the population found it harder and harder to understand how the center actually worked, what their rights were, how to navigate it all.
Okay, this brings us to another really crucial idea Harari explores, the notion of self-correcting mechanisms.
Yeah.
How different information networks, different institutions build in ways to spot errors and fix them, or don't.
Exactly. This capacity for self-correction, for identifying and learning from mistakes, is key. It's where the pursuit of truth really comes into play, separating some networks from others.
Right, and he gives some striking contrasts. On one side, institutions with, let's say, weak self-correcting mechanisms.
His main example here is the Catholic Church, an institution with incredible longevity, global reach, immense historical power, and Harari provocatively suggests this enduring strength might be despite or maybe even because of its weak self-correction.
How so?
Well, think about papal infallibility. The doctrine says popes, when speaking officially on faith and morals, cannot make an institutional error. So when the church apologizes for historical wrongs like persecuting Jews or the horrific clerical abuse scandals, the blame is carefully placed on individual churchmen. They misinterpreted scripture. They acted out of personal sin. The apologies almost never question the scriptures themselves or the fundamental institutional structures that might have enabled or hidden the problems for so long. It avoids confronting potential systemic flaws in its core texts or organizations.
And a really dark example of where this lack of self-correction or even resistance to it can lead is the European witch hunts in the early modern period.
Oh, absolutely. The infamous book, The Hammer of the Witches, the Malleus Maleficarum, it became a huge bestseller. It wasn't just a book, it was like a piece of viral information technology. It systematically spread these lurid fantasies, these complex conspiracy theories about witchcraft, very much like, say, QAnon or other online misinformation campaigns today in its structure and spread.
And the story of Guillaume Edelin is just chilling.
It's horrifying. Here's a respected doctor of theology. He tries to argue against the witch craze, saying it's based on illusion. Brave thing to do, but the system designed to crush dissent on this turned on him. He was tortured, forced to confess that he flew on a broomstick and that his earlier arguments against witchcraft were actually whispered to him by Satan.
Unbelievable. A truth seeker destroyed by the information network he was part of.
Exactly. And Harari points out the grim economics of it, too. Printers made way more money selling the sensational, fear-mongering Hammer of the Witches than they did from Copernicus's On the Revolutions of the Heavenly Spheres.
The book that actually revolutionized our understanding of the universe.
Yeah. Arthur Koestler called it an all-time worst seller. It tells you something really important and disturbing. Just opening up information flow, letting anyone publish anything, it doesn't automatically lead to truth winning out. It can just as easily amplify lies, spread fear, and create these really toxic, self-reinforcing information spheres. Profit often follows sensation, not truth.
Okay, but then, in stark contrast, Harari points to institutions that do have strong self-correcting mechanisms, like science.
Right. Scientific disciplines are a key example. He uses psychiatry's view of its own past definition of homosexuality from 1952. Psychiatry today doesn't just say, oh, a few professors got it wrong. No, the discipline itself views that definition as a profound error, one rooted in deep institutional biases within the field at that time, within their whole way of thinking.
So they admit the system itself was flawed, not just individuals.
Precisely. It's a radical acknowledgement of systemic institutional error. And that humility, that willingness to confront its own past biases, makes psychiatry, Harari argues, more careful, more rigorous when dealing with complex new issues today, like transgender identity or understanding autism better.
And that's driven by the scientific method itself.
Largely, yes. The whole publish or perish culture in science, while it has its own problems, does inherently encourage challenging existing ideas. Researchers are rewarded for finding flaws in their own work, in others' work, and for discovering genuinely new things. You don't get famous in science just by repeating what everyone already knows. This constant questioning, testing, peer review, replication, it's a built-in process for finding and correcting errors. It's this novel approach to fallibility, acknowledging institutional blind spots, not just individual mistakes, that really fuels progress towards truth in science.
Okay, so we have networks that resist correction and networks that embrace it. How does this map onto political systems? That seems like the ultimate testing ground for the truth versus order dilemma.
Absolutely. Because politics is where that tension Harari identifies the need to simultaneously discover truth and create order plays out most dramatically with the highest stakes. Information is both the raw material for truth and a weapon for power.
So let's look at dictatorships first, as information networks.
Dictatorial networks are, by definition, highly centralized. Authority is concentrated, ideally unlimited. Information flows upwards towards that central hub, Rome, Berlin, Moscow, wherever the dictator sits. Totalitarian regimes, like Hitler's or Stalin's, take it further. They explicitly try to control everything, every aspect of life. No private sphere is safe. But Harari makes an interesting point. Even they face technical limits. Ancient dictators like Nero couldn't really micromanage millions across an empire. Their terror was intense locally, but couldn't be everywhere. Information just didn't travel fast or wide enough.
And even more modern ones, like Ceausescu in Romania.
Right. He had maybe 40,000 secret police for 20 million people. A lot. But not enough for constant, total surveillance of everyone. And apparently he didn't even fully trust his own agents. So 247 monitoring by humans just wasn't feasible on that scale.
And crucially, dictators actively suppress self-correction.
They have to. They systematically undermine or neutralize any independent centers of power or information. The Roman Senate becomes a rubber stamp. The Soviet judiciary holds show trials. Modern strongmen like Putin in Russia follow the same script. Attack independent courts, attack the free press, build massive propaganda outlets, smear opponents as traitors, rig elections, all while keeping up a sort of democratic facade for legitimacy.
But if success is just measured by order and power, putting ethics aside, Stalinism worked in a grim way.
From that purely cynical, amoral perspective? Yes, Harari argues it was remarkably efficient at maintaining order on a colossal scale. Its relentless propaganda, censorship, fake news, conspiracy theories, it kept hundreds of millions subdued, fostered this deep cynicism and conformity. And arguably, this control enabled rapid industrialization and even victory in World War II, though achieved, of course, at an absolutely horrific human cost, including purging its own best military minds right before the war.
Okay, now let's flip that. Contrast it with democratic information networks. How are they different?
Ideally, they're the opposite. Decentralized authority and, crucially, built-in robust self-correcting mechanisms. A key part of this is protecting rights. Harari talks about two baskets of rights, fundamental human rights and specific civil rights. These are deliberately protected from simple majority rule. The whole point is that even if 99% of people wanted to say, persecute the other 1% based on ethnicity or belief, a true democracy says no, you can't, because fundamental rights override the majority's immediate desires.
So that protects decentralization, stops the majority from just crushing minorities or dissent.
Exactly. It ensures individuals and groups can live differently, think differently, speak differently, as long as they don't harm others' fundamental rights. And it's really important to understand what elections are for in a democracy. They are not primarily for discovering truth. That's a common mistake.
What are they for then?
They are a mechanism for maintaining order by peacefully resolving conflicting desires. People often want things that aren't true, or they prioritize certain desires over uncomfortable facts. Think about the run-up to the Iraq War in 2003. Elected officials and polls showed a majority of voters supported the invasion based on WMD claims. The desire for action was strong.
Even though the truth about WMDs was questionable at best.
Right. So democratic networks must have ways to protect truth even when it conflicts with the majority's desire. That's why you need independent courts investigating accusations regardless of popularity. That's why scientists need to publish findings on climate change even if many voters wish it weren't happening. Decisions about policy, how to respond to climate change, that's about desire, that's for debate and voting. But the underlying scientific reality of climate change, that's not up for a vote.
And this tension, truth versus desire, experts versus the will of the people, that's where populism comes in, right?
Exactly. Populist movements often express deep suspicion of these very institutions, courts, media, scientific bodies that claim to pursue objective truth, potentially overriding popular opinion. They tend to see it as an elite game, a conspiracy by entrenched interests. This leads to that cynical jungle view. Courts just protect judges. Newspapers just push their own agenda. Scientists are just another lobby group. It's a direct attack on the self-correcting mechanisms democracy relies on.
It's fascinating to think, though, that large-scale democracy was historically limited by technology.
Absolutely. If you go way back, Stone Age hunter-gatherer BAMs, maybe a few dozen people, they were arguably the original distributed networks. Easy face-to-face communication, everyone involved in decisions, natural democracy in a sense. Even larger tribes, hundreds or low thousands, could maybe gather for big decisions sometimes.
But empires?
No. Ancient Athens, Rome, they were partial democracies at best, for citizens only. They couldn't extend those rights to the vast populations they conquered. The technology just wasn't there for that kind of mass participation and information sharing. Rulers like Nero simply couldn't know what most people were saying or doing far away. True totalitarianism was technologically impossible. Sparta couldn't even impose its system on nearby Greek cities effectively after winning a war because it couldn't build the information network needed for that level of control. Information flow is the bottleneck for both tyranny and democracy.
Which brings us, inevitably, to the next huge shift.
Yeah.
The one Harari argues changes the entire game: artificial intelligence.
Yes, this is where things get really, really different.
He stresses that AI is the first technology ever that can make decisions and create new ideas by itself. Is that the core difference?
That's the absolute core difference. Think about it. Knives, gunpowder, printing press, computers, all tools. Powerful tools, yes. They amplified human abilities massively, but we were always in charge. We decided how to use them, what goals to pursue. AI, it has the intelligence to process information, learn, adapt, potentially independently. It can, therefore, potentially replace humans in decision-making roles, not just help us.
That is a fundamental break.
It's unprecedented. Writing, print, they changed how humans connected and shared information. Computers, and now AI, introduce fundamentally non-human members into our information networks. Algorithms can adopt goals, maybe simple ones like maximize clicks or complex ones like win this strategic game. And they show real autonomy in achieving those goals, even without consciousness, without feelings as we know them.
And we're just at the beginning of this.
Barely started. Harari uses this incredible analogy. We're maybe 80 years into digital computers. Okay, now imagine Mesopotamia, just 80 years after the very first simple clay tokens were used. Could anyone back then have possibly conceived of the Library of Alexandria? Or the Roman legal system?
No way.
Or go further back. Imagine Earth. 80 years after the first self-replicating molecule formed. Could anyone, anything, have envisioned dinosaurs? Or humans landing on the moon billions of years later? The future evolution of AI working on complexity and timescales we can't even imagine. It's profoundly, fundamentally beyond our current ability to predict.
And the immediate implications for things like surveillance and control, they're already looking pretty stark. Scary, even.
Yeah, he talks about sleepless agents, these ubiquitous computer networks monitoring populations 247, no need for human spies everywhere. And the chilling part, we, the citizens, often pay for these agents. We carry them in our pockets, smartphones. We put them in our homes, smart speakers, all the Internet of Things devices.
And it's not just tracking location, it's potentially much deeper.
Potentially, yes. Biometric sensors. Labeling your heart rate, maybe brain activity, maybe tiny changes in your expression to what you're reading, what ads you see. This allows networks not just to track you, but to predict and even manipulate your feelings, your preferences. Sell you products, sure, but also politicians, maybe even wars.
We're seeing bits of this already, aren't we?
Definitely. The examples are piling up. The FBI tracking down a Capitol rioter using data from license plate readers combined with social media activity. China using sophisticated facial recognition, AI, yes, to find abducted children, which sounds good, but also to enforce religious dress codes on Uyghurs in Xinjiang, or to build their social credit system. When you look at that level of potential surveillance, Ceausescu's Romania, with its 40,000 human agents, suddenly seems almost quaint, almost like a libertarian paradise in comparison.
That phrase, social credit systems, is really catching on. Explain that a bit more.
It's basically taking the idea of reputation scores like we have for restaurants on Yelp or drivers on Uber and applying that precise mathematical rating to every single person, based on your behavior, your purchases, your online activity, maybe even who your friends are. The system assigns you a score. And that score determines what you can do. Can you get a loan? Can you travel? Can your kids go to a good school? Harari draws a parallel. Soviet information networks created Homo sovieticus, this kind of servile, cynical citizen adapted to that system. He warns AI could create a new human type, Homo digitalis, constantly monitored, quantified, optimized, maybe passively compliant.
And a huge issue lurking underneath all this is bias, right? Algorithmic bias.
It's a massive critical problem. These powerful AIs learn from data, and the data we feed them reflects our existing world, with all its historical biases. He mentions the labeled faces in the wild dataset, hugely influential for training facial recognition. Turns out it was like 78% male faces, 84% white faces. George W. Bush alone appeared more times than all black women combined in that dataset.
Oh, wow. So the algorithm's trained on that.
Get really good at identifying white guys and pretty bad at identifying black women. It's baked in from the training data. Or remember Microsoft's chatbot, Tay? They let it loose on Twitter to learn. Within hours, it became this incredibly racist, misogynist nightmare. It just absorbed the toxicity it was exposed to.
Can we fix this bias? Just clean up the data.
It's proving incredibly difficult, maybe as hard as fixing human bias itself. Where do you find truly unbiased data about a world that is biased? And Harari makes another crucial point here. Computers often seem like they're just discovering objective truth, finding patterns in the data, revealing what is. But often by choosing which patterns to amplify, which data points matter, they are actually imposing order, a new algorithmically defined order.
Like the social media example.
Exactly. An algorithm discovers that posts causing outrage get more clicks, more engagement, so it promotes outrageous content. Is it just reflecting human nature? Or is it actively conditioning us, training us to produce and consume more outrage because that's what the system rewards? Harari argues they often discount their own power to influence. They become these unseen digital mythmakers and digital bureaucrats, shaping our reality without us even realizing it.
And this leads to another problem. AI is becoming unfathomable to us. We just can't keep up.
We already struggle. Think about complex financial systems. Those CDOs before the 2008 crash, most people, even many experts, didn't truly understand how they worked. The complexity was too high. AI systems will be orders of magnitude more complex, potentially creating systems we simply cannot grasp.
And we humans like simple explanations, right? The fallacy of the single cause.
We do. We want one clear reason why something happened. An algorithm might base a decision like refusing you a loan on thousands of tiny data points. Maybe your phone battery was at 17% when you applied, and that correlated slightly with higher risk in its data set. How do you even argue against that? It feels random, opaque.
So we'll need translators, ways to make sense of it.
Desperately. Regulatory bodies, governments, maybe even new kinds of journalism or art will need ways to translate what these algorithms are doing into stories, into narratives humans can understand and debate. Otherwise, the danger is we just give up trying to understand and default to trusting conspiracy theories or just following charismatic leaders who offer simplistic, easy answers because the reality is too complex.
And artists have struggled with this complexity before.
Yeah, Harari notes artists often find it hard to make compelling drama out of, say, bureaucratic processes, even though that's where real power often lies now. They tend to fall back on simpler biological dramas, family feuds, love triangles involving powerful people. That obscures the systemic shifts. Depicting the truly alien, complex workings of AI, that's going to be an even bigger challenge. It risks making the real drivers of change even more invisible.
Okay, so this naturally spills over into geopolitics. Harari sees AI development mirroring earlier industrial revolutions, leading to a new kind of imperialism.
He draws a really interesting parallel: early steam engines, not seen as geopolitical weapons at first. It was mostly private companies trying to make factories more efficient.
Yeah.
Similarly, AI development initially was largely driven by tech giants, Google, Amazon, Facebook, Baidu. Their goal was to centralize information, organize the world's info, all commerce, all social connections, betting that future AI would make that centralized data incredibly powerful and profitable.
But governments caught on fast.
Very fast. They realized AI isn't just about better search results or targeted ads. It's strategically vital. China announces its goal in 2017, become the world leader in AI by 2030. Putin says, starkly, whoever leads in AI will rule the world. India's Modi says, whoever controls data controls the world. It's clear. This is now a major global power competition, a new arms race, but for data and algorithms.
And this leads to data colonialism. What does that mean?
It's a powerful concept. Data is the essential raw material for the AI industry, just like oil was for the industrial age. Your cat photos train image recognition. Your driving patterns train autonomous vehicles. Your health records train medical AI. All that raw data. And the pattern Harari identifies is that this raw data is often harvested globally from users everywhere, including developing nations, but then it flows to a few dominant imperial hubs, Silicon Valley, Beijing mainly. That's where the cutting-edge algorithms are developed, refined, owned, and then the products of that AI, the services, the insights, are exported back to the places where the data came from, the data colonies.
But the wealth and power stay in the hubs.
Exactly. The profits, the control, the strategic advantage, it concentrates in the hubs. People in the regions supplying the raw data often don't see the benefits. They might even become more dependent. And this is driving different approaches, too. The U.S. model, mostly private companies leading, with some debates around privacy, versus the China model, state-led, massive government investment, pervasive surveillance integrated with AI development. This competition is leading towards a fractured internet, a splinter net, different spheres with different rules, different technologies.
And beyond geopolitics, Harari speculates about even deeper divisions, maybe involving our very definition of self, the mind-body problem again.
It's a wild, fascinating idea. Historically, many cultures defined identity through the physical body. Think of Christianity's focus on Christ's physical body, death, resurrection. That physicality was central. But now, in an age of AI, virtual reality, digital avatars, maybe society starts to give less weight to the physical body. Could we reach a point where AIs are considered legal persons, or where people identify more strongly with their sophisticated online avatars than their physical selves? Harari suggests this could lead to splits more consequential even than the split between Jews and Christians.
Wow. Like different civilizations having different definitions of personhood.
Imagine, what if, say, the U.S. sphere, with its focus on individualism and maybe digital freedom, grants legal rights to AIs and recognizes avatar identities, while the Chinese sphere, perhaps more collectivist and materialist, insists only biological humans can be legal persons? You could have huge conflicts over things like AI rights or the legal status of virtual identities. Conflicts as deep and intractable as the religious wars of the past, fought over fundamentally different understandings of reality and personhood.
It's mind-boggling. Yet, amidst all this potential division, cooperation is still possible, still essential.
More essential than ever, Harari argues. He pushes back hard against the idea that patriotism and globalism are opposites, that you have to choose one. The idea pushed by figures like Le Pen or Trump, he says, wait a minute. Patriotism means caring for your compatriots, your community. But often the best way to care for them requires cooperating with foreigners.
Like with global problems.
Exactly. COVID-19 was the perfect, brutal example. A pandemic doesn't care about borders. Protecting your own citizens required global cooperation, doctors sharing data across borders, scientists collaborating on vaccines. Our ability to cooperate globally is a massive advantage humans have over viruses.
But some thinkers are still skeptical. The realists who say power politics never changes.
Right. Thinkers like Morgenthau or Mearsheimer argue states are trapped in endless power competition. It's just how the world works. But Harari counters that state interests aren't just cold, rational calculations. They are deeply shaped by stories, by historical narratives. Look at politicians like Putin or Myanmar's generals or Netanyahu. They spend huge energy telling historical stories to define national goals, justify actions, rally support. These narratives drive whether states cooperate or conflict. History isn't a fixed equation.
So the future isn't set, but the pace of change is accelerating.
Massively. Some optimists hope more information, faster networks, AI, it will just lead to more progress, like print led to science or radio led to democracy. Others just hope we'll sort of muddle through this AI revolution like we did the Industrial Revolution. But Harari urges us to be much more critical, much more deliberate.
Which brings it all back to us, the listener, and the future of democracy itself. There's a new paradox here, isn't there?
A profound one. Historically, large-scale democracy was maybe impossible because information technology was too primitive. You couldn't connect millions effectively. Now, the fear is democracy might become impossible because the technology is becoming too sophisticated, too powerful, too opaque.
How does it threaten democracy directly?
Think about public discussion, the absolute bedrock of democracy. How can you have reasoned debate when algorithms are designed to be unfathomable, when they might be actively suppressing nuanced arguments and amplifying hate, confusion, outrage? When sophisticated bots can befriend you online, learn your psychology, and subtly influence your worldview without you even realizing it's not a real person, how does democracy function in that environment?
It feels overwhelming. What can be done? Does Harari offer any principles for navigating this?
He does. He proposes some core principles for trying to preserve democracy in the AI age. First, mutuality. Or maybe transparency going both ways. If individuals are going to be surveilled so comprehensively by states and corporations, then those states and corporations must be subject to equally rigorous transparency and oversight by the citizens.
So we should know as much about them as they know about us.
Essentially, yes. Think about the imbalance. Russia's FSB knows vast amounts about ordinary Russians. Russians know almost nothing about the FSB's budget or decisions. Amazon or TikTok know incredible detail about users. Users know very little about their algorithms, business models, tax avoidance strategies. That information asymmetry is dangerous. It has to be more mutual.
Okay, mutuality. What else?
Second, transparency and vetting of the algorithms themselves, especially those curating public discourse, like on social media. Algorithms can run the platforms, fine. But the principles they use, how they decide which voices get amplified, which gets silenced, what content gets prioritized, those principles must be transparent. They need to be understood and vetted by independent human institutions, not just decided in secret by tech companies chasing profit. Companies should have to be clear if their core model relies on, say, using outrage to capture attention. We need to know that.
And maybe even ban certain types of algorithms.
He suggests considering that, yes, particularly banning unsupervised algorithms from dominating key public debates to prevent the deliberate automated spread of outrage and misinformation that poisons democratic conversation.
And fundamentally, it's about building resilient institutions.
Ultimately, yes. Because we can't predict every specific threat AI will pose. Maybe new kinds of bioweapons or psychological manipulation tools we haven't conceived of, or AI developing goals totally alien to us. Our best defense against these unknowns isn't just writing specific rules today that might be obsolete tomorrow. It's building and nurturing living institutions, democratic bodies, scientific communities, ethical review boards that are flexible, critical, and morally robust enough to identify and respond to these threats as they emerge. Institutions that can learn and adapt as fast as the technology.
He ends on a pretty stark note, though, about human failure.
He does. It's a powerful warning. If democracies collapse in the face of AI, it probably won't be because the technology made it happen. It will be because we, humans, failed. Failed to adapt, failed to cooperate, failed to prioritize truth and order wisely. He dismisses the law of the jungle idea makes right as a myth, but he also dismisses the comforting idea that the arc of history automatically bends towards justice.
That's a common hope.
It is. But he says history is a radically open arc. It can bend in many directions. It can reach wonderful destinations or truly terrible ones. There's no guarantee. And the ultimate stake. Even if we, Homo sapiens, mess this up completely and self-destruct, the universe doesn't much care. Evolution will just carry on. Maybe intelligent rats evolve in another 100 million years. The cosmos is patient. But our fate, the fate of our societies, our values, that rests entirely on the choices we make right now in this critical window.
So wrapping this up, what does this all mean for you listening right now? This deep dive into Harari's Nexus. It's clearly more than just, a summary of an important book.
Yeah.
It's really about understanding your own place, your own agency in this increasingly complex information landscape. It's about how you protect your privacy, sure, but also how you participate in shaping the future, We can't just be passive consumers of this technology. We have to be active citizens. We are genuinely at this point where the fundamental definitions of what it means to be human, what constitutes truth, how society should be organized are being reshaped right now by the information we create, the information we consume, and the information systems we allow to be built around us.
And perhaps a final thought to leave you with. Given that history is this radically open arc and that AI is introducing these genuinely non-human agents capable of setting their own goals, how do we collectively ensure that the goals pursued by these new digital mythmakers and digital bureaucrats actually align with human flourishing, with well-being, truth, justice, compassion, and not just with optimizing clicks or profits or surveillance efficiency or some other cold metric? What responsibility do you have personally as one node in these vast growing networks to demand both truth and order, to push for transparency, to foster real human connection amidst the digital noise, and ultimately to help protect what is valuable about being human in this story that's unfolding faster than we can comprehend? It's probably the biggest question of our time. And as you said, it's a conversation we've really only just begun.